Howdy, friend. The end of the Wild West is often glossed over and forgotten. It was a time when more than 420 million troy ounces, or about 13,000 metric tons of gold were mined. A time when people searched for freedom, when romanticized outlaws roamed the frontier, when only a handful of righteous but brutal sheriffs could catch them. This era inspired countless legendary movies, books and games, yet the very thing that ended it all has tried to make us forget how it happened. But let's see how it all started. Trains. After the end of the not-so-civilized Civil War, the railroads were completed, opening a path for settlers to move westwards. The West began to fill with people, despite the fact that Native Americans already lived there. And because of the immense size of the United States, regulations were scarce. The farther west you traveled, the fewer rules there were. More freedom, yes, but also more outlaws who were harder to control. Still, because 50 acres of land were cheaper than a horse, people took their chances. With a gun at your hip and your family in the back of a wagon, you rode along the Oregon Trail. If you were lucky enough to reach your land alive, you started a ranch. To run a ranch and manage livestock, you needed hired hands. Cowboys. Cowboys are the pop culture symbol of a Wild West. Rough men with guns who did as the police and acted as judge, jury and executioner when something went wrong. But that version of a cowboy isn't true. Cowboys were cattle herders.
In the beginning,
Many were Mexicans who came north with their herding traditions. The word cowboy itself comes from the Spanish vaquero. Cowboys didn't earn much either, about $1 a day, barely enough for basic necessities. So, when we think of cowboys in the popular media, we actually think of a mix of Mountainmen, Outlaws and Lawmen, all under the name of gunslingers. Mountainmen, also known as trappers or frontiersmen, were the explorers of a group. They famously roamed the Rocky Mountains and were experts at fishing, hunting and trapping. They were also the first to explore this wilderness and opened the emergent trails. Mountain men were most common from about 1810s to the 1880s, but their trade declined by the late 1840s, when the silk industry replaced the demand for beaver pelts. One of the most famous mountain men was Jim Bridger, a legendary explorer from the early days of the era. Then there were the Outlaws. Outlaws thrived in the American Wild West. They robbed trains, banks, killed when necessary or simply when they wanted to. Some even wrote poems after their crimes, like Black Bart. But why were there so many outlaws in the first place? Because the West was enormous and often there was only one sheriff responsible for thousands of square miles. Combine that with the untamed geography, post-Civil War trauma and the struggling economy, many people turned to crime. The plains were roamed by notorious bandits like Billy the Kid, Jesse James and Butch Cassidy. But as all things ended in the Wild West, so did the outlaw era. The numbers of lawmen increased and communication became much faster thanks to the telegraph. Lawmen were responsible for keeping the peace in towns, and they had the authority to shoot anyone who disturbed it. One well-known incident is the OK Corral shootout in 1881, when Virgil, Wyatt and Morgan Earp, along with their friend Doc Holliday, faced off against an outlaw gang known as the Coochie Country Boys. Lawmen didn't disappear, they simply evolved from local peacekeepers into formal police forces as their number grew. Yet the Wild West, with all its legendary possibilities, had to come to an end. And what killed it? The same thing that ends every era, the forces that allows new eras to begin. Progress. The telegraph was a game changer. Developed in 1835, at the height of the Wild West, it slowly spread across the United States. Faster communication meant information could get relayed almost instantly. More lawmen could be summoned and more could be dispatched when needed. The US Census Bureau eventually declared the frontier closed, as there was no longer a clear frontier line. Ranchers, farmers and towns now filled the land. the confinement of Native Americans to reservations, and the near extinction of buffalo solidified federal control over the region. And so, through progress, control, and brutal treatment of Native people, the Wild West and its legendary stories came to an end.